Europe 1916. The heart of the continent lies buried under mud, fire, and ash. The air reeks of smoke and blood. Every inch of ground is bartered with the lives of men who no longer scream when they die. This is the Western Front, the trench-slashed wound of a continent locked in an industrialized death spiral, and the Battle of the Somme is about to erupt. For nearly 2 years, armies have clawed at each other across a stagnant 450-mile front, where progress is measured in yards and paid for in legions. The optimism of 1914 has curdled into an era of siege and attrition. The men who once charged with banners now crouch beneath sandbags, waiting for an order they know may lead nowhere but into oblivion. By the start of 1916, the war had taken on a grim rhythm. On the French side, the fortress city of Verdun becomes the axis of German assault. The attack, launched in February by the German Crown Prince's Fifth Army, is intended to bleed France white, but the defenders, led by General Philippe Pétain, hold firm. French reserve per an. The cost is staggering. France bleeds but does not collapse. To ease pressure on their battered allies, the British promise a grand counterstroke. The target, a quiet sector of the line near the River Somme. The location is chosen not for its strategic value, but for one simple reason: it is where the British and French armies meet. If a joint offensive is to be mounted, it must be here. The man tasked with leading Britain's greatest military undertaking thus far is General Sir Douglas Haig, newly appointed commander of the British Expeditionary Force. He had hoped for an attack further north near Arras, where the ground is firmer, the objectives clearer. He had hoped to wait, train, prepare, but France cannot wait. Verdun is still bleeding. And so, despite deep misgivings, the British Fourth Army under Lieutenant General Henry Rawlinson begins to draw up plans. They call it a big push. In the minds of his architects, it will shatter the German line, liberate northern France, and restore movement to the war. But in the hushed trenches and supply trains stretching back for miles, a darker sentiment brews. Many of these men volunteers. Friends, workmates shave never seen combat, the Pals Battalions, born of recruitment drives, promising that men could fight alongside those they knew and loved, are about to be annihilated together. As June wears on, the Allied plan takes shape, a 7-day artillery bombardment, the largest in British history, will soften the German lines. 19 underground mines, packed with high explosives, will erupt beneath enemy strongpoints. The infantry, walking shoulder to shoulder, will advance across no man's land at 7:30 a.m. The 1st of July. The planners believe this will be enough, that the wire will be cut, that the trenches will be shattered, that the defenders will be dead or dazed, that the way forward will be clear. But these hopes are illusions. Beneath the scorched soil of the Somme, the German army has been busy. Multiple defensive lines, each anchored on fortified villages and networked with deep dugouts. Now stand ready. Barbed wire remains thick. Machine guns are positioned to rake the field from cross angles. And deep underground, telephone cables run 6 feet below the surface, allowing real-time communication between frontline troops and distant artillery. The Germans are not caught off guard. They have intercepted phone calls. Captured prisoners have told them what is coming. Their guns are loaded, and their machine gunners wait. The British believe their 6 million shells will do the job, but many are duds. Their gunners are inexperienced. Some batteries are poorly coordinated, and the Germans, hunkered in their deep dugouts, survive in greater numbers than anyone expects. Then comes the moment, the 1st of July, T00AM. The final phase of the bombardment erupts. Gun barrels glow red. Shells crash across the front like an unending storm. At 7, Archer, the Hawthorne Ridge mine is detonated, sending earth and men hundreds of feet into the air. British troops surge forward to seize the crater. 10 minutes later, the remaining mines erupt. At 7, Censure, whistle blow. Across 15 miles of front, thousands of men rise from the trenches and walk into hell. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine hearing the whistle. The earth beneath you shakes with distant blasts. But now, your captain waves forward. The air smells of cordite. The wire head still glints in the sun. And now, you're climbing, stepping over the parapet. There is no turning back. On the left, in the northern sector near Gomacourt and Serre, the attack falters instantly. Barbed wire is uncut. The few paths through it funnel troops into narrow gaps where they are mowed down and enfilade by waiting machine guns. Entire platoons vanish in minutes. Bodies pile up at the wire. At Thiepval, the 36th Ulster Division achieves one of the few breakthroughs, seizing the Schwaben redoubt, but with no support on either flank, they are left stranded. German counterattacks envelop them. Survivors retreat or are captured. The ground is soaked with blood. At La Boisselle, the Lotnagar mine leaves a crater 300 feet wide. Men of the 34th Division charge forward, seizing the rim, but again, the line cannot hold. Artillery support is misaligned. Communication is broken. And the price of every inch is measured in limbs and screams. By midday, British losses are catastrophic. Yet, many commanders still believe the attack is going well. Communications have failed. Carrier pigeons are shot down. Field telephones have gone silent. Runners are killed before reaching command posts. And so, orders to push on continue, long after the front has collapsed. Further south, things go differently. There, French heavy artillery more powerful, more accurate paves the way. The 18th and 30th British divisions take Montauban and Mametz. The French XX Corps storms its objectives, capturing 3 Nol prisoners. Their colonial troops surge across the field with speed and discipline. The Germans, surprised by the strength of the southern assault, begin to abandon positions. But these gains are limited, and they come at enormous cost. By nightfall, over 57, 0 British soldiers lie dead, dying, or wounded. 1/3 of them killed. It is the bloodiest day in the history of the British Army, and the battle has only just begun. The sun sets over the shattered earth of the Somme, but the guns do not sleep. The moans of the wounded rise from craters filled with water and blood. Medical teams drag stretchers through fields churned into swamps by shell fire. And in London, the headlines are not yet written. What the public knows is hope. What the front knows is horror. In the days that follow, commanders slowly begin to grasp the scale of the disaster. Entire battalions have ceased to exist. Officers write casualty reports with trembling hands. But despite the failure of the northern assault, Haig does not call off the offensive. He cannot. The French are still locked in the meat grinder of Verdun. If the British halt now, they abandon their ally. If they advance, they may yet bleed the German army dry. And so, the Somme becomes not the breakthrough it was promised to be, but a battle of attrition, a test of industrial capacity, manpower, and national will, a grinder of men and materiel, the British shift tactics. No longer do they rely on vast waves of infantry advancing in daylight. Instead, they begin to attack in smaller, more concentrated operations, bite and hold, a trench line here, a fortified village there. The goal is not rapid progress. But systématique, destruction. The enemy must be worn down. And the Germans feel it. For all their success on the 1st of July, they too suffer. The bombardments never cease. Night and day. Shells rain down on their positions. The deep dugouts that saved them in the beginning now collapse under constant pressure. Ammunition runs low. Reinforcements arrive, exhausted and terrified. At Pozières, the Australians arrive. Veterans of Gallipoli. They bring with them hard-earned ferocity. In late July, they are ordered to take the village. The assault begins under cover of darkness, preceded by a creeping barrage, a new tactic in which artillery fire moves just ahead of advancing troops, keeping defenders pinned. The Australians reach the village. Then the Germans unleash their counterattack. For nearly 7 weeks, the battle for Pozières rages. The village is taken, lost, and retaken again. The ground changes hands repeatedly. When it is finally secured, it is nothing more than rubble and bones. Of the 23, 0 Australian casualties suffered on the Somme. Most fall here. To the east, at Delville Wood, South African troops fight in what becomes a charnel house. Trees are shredded into splinters. Gas and shell fire choke the air. The men dig in among corpses, holding their position against relentless attacks. By the time they are relieved, fewer than 800 of the original 3,000 remain. Elsewhere, Canadians face the hell of Courcelette. They storm across open fields into gunfire, capturing the village at great cost. The Newfoundland Regiment, too, suffers one of the war's most tragic moments. Ordered to advance across exposed ground near Beaumont Hamel, they are slaughtered. Of 801 men who go forward, only 68 answer roll call the next day. Imagine standing in that open field, the sky burning red with shell fire. The ground beneath you shakes like the pulse of a dying world. And yet, you run forward toward the guns, toward the wire, toward death itself, because that is the order, and your friends are beside you. With each day, the landscape grows more nightmarish. Rain turns the trenches into lakes. Corpses are used as footing. Men go mad from the constant noise. The lice, the rats, the fear. Machine guns become the dominant weapon of war, followed closely by shellfire. Most men do not die facing the enemy. They die without ever seeing who kills them. In September, tanks appear on the battlefield for the first time, clanking, smoking beasts of iron and rivets. They are few, slow, and unreliable. Many break down or become stuck, but they terrify the German defenders who have never seen such machines. At Flers-Courcelette, the British deploy 49 tanks, only 21 make it to the front. Yet the psychological impact is undeniable. A new age of warfare is born. Still, the price remains unbearable. Villages such as Thiepval, Goedecourt, and Le Transloy become bywords for sacrifice. For every yard gained, hundreds, and no end is in sight. Haig believes the Germans are nearing collapse, that one more push may break them. He sees his prisoner reports, intercepted communications, even aerial reconnaissance, but the truth is elusive. The fog of war never lifts over the Somme, and the rains of October turn it into a quagmire. By November, the final major assault is launched on the Butte de Warlencourt, a mound of chalky soil fortified into a bastion. The attack fails. Men sink waist deep in mud. Machine gun fire cuts through the murk. The Butte holds, and then, at last, it ends not with a breakthrough, not with victory, but with exhaustion. The battle for the Somme is over. November 1916. The guns fall silent at last along the Somme. The fields are quiet, save for the crows. In place of towns and villages stand stumps of trees, scorched stone, and silence. No triumphal march follows. No liberation of cities. No sudden collapse of the German army. What remains is mud and death. The cost is incalculable. For the British, over 430 no casualties. For the French, nearly 200 ling. For the Germans, an estimated 450 ling, nearly 1 million lives shattered for a gain of just 10 miles. The British public does not yet know the full scale. Reports speak of gallantry, of steady advances, of cooperation with their gallant French allies. Newspapers print names of the fallen in columns, so long they stretch across pages. Families in Yorkshire, Dublin, Manchester, and Cardiff await telegrams they hope never come. But the men who return, those who have crawled through the broken earth of Delville Wood, who have slept under shell fire near Pozières, who have seen their best friends vanish in flashes of metal carry with them, a story far darker than the maps will show. Was it worth it? This question haunts the minds of millions for decades to come. The Somme becomes the symbol of World War I's futility, its carnage, its waste, its horror. In British memory, it is inseparable from the idea of lions led by donkeys. Brave men led to slaughter by distant generals who mistook statistics for strategy. And yet, among the survivors and many of their commanders, a different interpretation quietly takes root. The Somme may have failed in its grand objectives to break through, to liberate, to crush the German line, but it succeeded in something more insidious, wearing down the enemy. The German army in 1916 was not the same force it had been in 1914. Its losses at Verdun and the Somme combined began to tip the scales. While British armies were bloodied, they learned, the artillery improved, coordination with aircraft began to show results. The creeping barrage matured. The tank, though still primitive, had been tested. Haig, widely condemned in later decades, believed the Somme was a step on a long and brutal road. He may not have been entirely wrong. The lessons of the Somme would echo in 1917 and 1918, when the British Army finally developed into a coordinated, mechanized force capable of large-scale offensives. But none of this mattered to the men knee-deep in the mire, coughing from gas, scribbling letters home with trembling hands. They were not fighting for doctrine. They were fighting to survive, and most did not. You walk past rows of helmets hung on bayonets, a muddy boot still filled with a foot, a blood-stained letter pinned to a corpse, and in that moment, and you ask yourself, is this what victory costs? In Berlin, the German High Command recognizes the strain. The battle has drained reserves, crushed morale, and begun to erode the myth of German invincibility. Verdun had been a gamble to bleed France, but the Somme bleeds Germany too. Quietly, German strategists begin to prepare for a shift. The Hindenburg Line, a new, deeper defensive system, is planned. They will withdraw to stronger positions in 1917. The war is changing. Meanwhile, in London, Prime Minister H. Asquith is forced to resign in December. The toll of the war, the frustration over its progress, and the immense casualties at the Somme all contribute. David Lloyd George takes his place, promising more aggressive, coordinated leadership. The political price of the Somme has been paid and the war will only intensify. France, though relieved at the pressure taken off Verdun, is now weary. The long war drags on. In 1917, mutinies will spread through sections of the French army. Soldiers will refuse to march to the slaughter, and though they will continue to fight, it will be under different terms. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches the brutality of the Somme, the stalemate, the slaughter all are observed with growing unease. The myth of European rationality is breaking down. In less than a year, American soldiers will cross the Atlantic to join this mechanized nightmare. And across the British Empire, the battle leaves deep scars. Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans all bled for fields they had never heard of. Their dead lie in northern France, in rows marked by white stones. Their nations will never see Britain the same way again. In the cemeteries of the Somme today, the echoes remain. Names are etched in stone. The missing over 70,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers with no known grave are inscribed on the Thiepval Memorial, a colossus of limestone that stands watch over the killing fields. A new era of warfare has dawned. The romanticism of the cavalry charge is dead. In its place, steel, fire, gas, and total war. The Somme was not the end. It was a beginning, a baptism of flame for a generation that would never be the same. They came from the coal fields of Durham, from the shipyards of Belfast, from the farms of Saskatchewan and the hills of Wales. Bricklayers, clerks, schoolboys, miners, teachers, sons. Many had never left their towns before. They were handed a rifle. Now they lay beneath foreign soil or wandered the shattered front with thousand-yard stares. Their innocence consumed by the maw of modern war. The Battle of the Somme was more than a military operation. It was a human catastrophe and a psychological turning point. For Britain, especially, it was the moment the Great War ceased to be distant or abstract. Nearly every town, every village, every street had someone in uniform, and after July 1916, almost all had someone who never came back. Entire Pals Battalions were wiped out in a single morning. The 11th East Lancashire Regiment, known as the Accrington Pals, lost over 700 of its 720 men in just half an hour. Communities were gutted. Friends who enlisted together died side by side. Their families grieved not in isolation, but in shared silence. And still, new recruits came. What drove them? Not ignorance. By 1916, the horrors of trench warfare were no secret. Letters home spoke of lice, trench foot, corpses that twitched with rats, of dreams haunted by the cries of the dying. And yet, men volunteered, some out of duty, some out of pride, some because they could not bear to be left behind while their friends went to war. You receive a letter. Your older brother fell at Thiepval. Your best friend is missing after Posiers. You hold the paper in your hand and make a choice no to mourn, but to join them because grief and loyalty are twin flames in your heart, and the war feels like the only thing that matters now. The medical response to the Somme was unlike anything before. Field hospitals overflowed. Triage became brutal. Red tags for the dying, yellow for the critical, green for the walking wounded. Surgeons worked without pause. Hands raw, sleeves soaked, shell shock, still misunderstood, claimed minds faster than shrapnel claimed limbs. The battlefield itself was a medical nightmare. Mud infected wounds instantly. Men drowned in shell holes. Stretchers sank under their own weight. And yet, acts of quiet heroism abounded. Medics carried comrades across fields raked by gunfire. Chaplains prayed over the dying amid falling shells. Officers refused to leave the wounded behind. Meanwhile, the war changed society back home. The demand for munitions drew women into factories in unprecedented numbers. Their hands packed shells that their brothers and sons would fire. Their efforts kept the war machine alive, but it also gave rise to a new kind of independence. The old world was cracking and, though the men at the front didn't know it yet, the war they fought would reshape the world they left behind. Politically, too, the Somme had consequences. The notion of blind patriotism eroded under the weight of mass death. Anti-war voices began to grow not just among pacifists, but among those who had seen too much, buried too many, and still saw no end. And yet, the war machine pressed on. The experience of the Somme imprinted itself not just on bodies but on culture. The poetry of Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and others born of the trenches carved new wounds into the English language. Words like gas, fire, over the top, and no man's land became seared into the vocabulary of trauma. Later generations would remember the Somme as the symbol of absurdity. Officers sipping tea as boys fell in droves, orders to charge when the wire remained uncut, men drowning in mud as generals moved pins on maps. But within that horror were also acts of endurance, of camaraderie, of selflessness, that no future generation could fully understand. On the German side, the reaction was not so different. Soldiers wrote home of a battlefield from which no one returned whole. They spoke of respect for the enemy's courage and despair at their own nation's losses. For every German machine gunner who survived the first day, there was a man who held the line at the cost of his sanity. The Somme did not distinguish between victors and victims. It created only survivors and ghosts. The technology of war advanced faster than the human ability to comprehend it. Artillery barrages could now last days. Shells fell not just on soldiers, but on identity, reducing men to numbers, lives to logistics. Aerial reconnaissance became standard. Chemical warfare loomed. The modern battlefield automated, industrial, indifferent was here to stay. What the Somme revealed more than anything was the chasm between political ambition and human consequence. Empires could demand sacrifice, but they could not contain the grief that followed. Governments could call for glory, but could not account for the nightmares that lived in the minds of those who came home. And many didn't. Across the war cemeteries of France, white headstones stand in perfect rows. Some bear names: Manet do Not, a soldier of the Great War. They say, known unto God. Beneath them lies the price of pride, of fear, of empire, of failure. In the towns of England and Scotland, of Australia and Canada, the names of the Somme are etched into granite monuments. S'il but éternel. For many families, those stones are all they have. No body was returned. No grave was marked. Only the wind knows where they fell. It is winter now. The battle has ended. But the battlefield is not silent. Beneath the mud lie tens of thousands of bodies, some buried by shell fire. Others never recovered. Bones shift with each rainfall. Fragments of helmets and rifles still protrude from the ground. Farmers in the decades ahead will call them iron harvests, turning up rusted death with every plow. The Somme becomes a scar not just on the landscape of France, but on the soul of a generation. It stands as both a monument to human courage and a condemnation of human decision-making. What began as a hopeful thrust to relieve pressure on Verdun ended as one of the most prolonged, attritional slaughters in recorded history. And yet, the lessons of the Somme would shape the wars to come. For military planners, it was a case study in the brutal learning curve of modern combat. The importance of coordination between artillery and infantry, the need for flexible tactics, the rise of the tank, the airplane, the creeping barrage. The Somme burned away 19th century illusions. No longer would commanders expect swift battles or glorious charges. The future of warfare had been revealed in barbed wire and cordite. For nations, it was a reminder that industrial war consumed more than just shells and bullets. It devoured lives, economies, and morale. The sheer scale of logistical support required for the Somme changed how armies were structured, how factories were managed, how societies were mobilized. But for the soldiers, for the mud-caked infantryman who carried a photograph in his breast pocket, who whispered prayers in the deafening roar of shells, who watched his best friend disappear in a crimson mist, the Somme was not about lessons or legacies. It was about endurance. The last survivors of the Somme died in the early 2000s. With them passed the final first-hand memories of that field. But the Somme has not vanished from the collective conscience. It remains preserved in archives, in poetry, in the soil of northern France. Today, visitors walk the paths of Beaumont-Hamel, Pozières, Thiepval, Delville Wood. They pass preserved trenches, cratered fields, rusted shrapnel. They read names carved into walls, see ages, 19, Archer, Archar. They hear wind pass through stone, and for a moment, they understand. You stand at Thiepval Memorial. The sky is pale and cold. You read name after name, but none feel like strangers. Because in this place, time folds in on itself. You hear a footstep behind you, but it's not yours. It's theirs. The Somme was not a war-ending victory. It did not free cities or topple governments. It moved the front a handful of miles, but it altered everything. The way nations fought, the way they grieved, the way they remembered. It was the moment innocence was buried forever under European soil. And yet, despite all of it, despite the blunders, the arrogance, the cost, the men went forward. Not blindly, not joyfully, but because they were asked, because they believed in duty, in one another, in something greater, even when they could not name it. That is what lingers in the silence of the Somme. Not just death, but défiance. In a war where millions were reduced to numbers, the Somme reminds us each of those numbers had a name, a face, a story, and none of them ever imagined that they would be remembered not for what they achieved, but for how bravely they died trying